following case involves real events and unsolved mysteries. Based on factual reporting, it explores disturbing circumstances. Viewer discretion is advised. The darkness is real, and sometimes the truth remains hidden in the shadows.
On May 4th, 1932, in a quiet corner of Stockholm's Atlas district, police broke down the door to a small, unlit apartment. Inside, they found a woman lying face down on her bed. The room was spotless. The furniture undisturbed. Her clothes neatly folded on a chair nearby. And beside the bed, a blood-stained gravy ladle. Her name was Lilly Lindeström, and the horror that unfolded inside that room would echo across Sweden for nearly a century, shrouded in myth, speculation, and a single chilling name: the Atlas Vampire. In 1932, Stockholm was a city caught between two worlds. The Atlas district, near Sankt Eriksplan, was a symbol of new beginnings, a neighborhood born from the bones of old factories, where sleek, modern buildings stood tall against the lingering chill of Northern Europe. Wide streets carved through rows of new apartments, their sharp lines and clean facades whispering promises of progress and modernity. But not everyone living there shared in that dream. Economic depression had settled over Sweden like a heavy fog. Jobs were scarce. Poverty tightened its grip on the working class. And places like Atlas, ambition and hardship lived side by side, often separated only by a single locked door. Sweden itself was changing too. The early 1930s marked the rise of the folkmet ideal, a vision of a fairer, more collective society that still struggled against the harsh realities of economic instability. Atlas, with its bright facades and new architecture, was meant to embody that dream. But behind closed doors, life remained unpredictable, and sometimes dangerous. It was there, in a small, modest apartment near Sankt Eriksplan, that Lilly Lindeström built her life. At 32 years old, she lived alone, working quietly as a sex worker, not on the streets, but from her own home. She was resourceful, modern for her time, the only tenant in her building with a telephone, a rare luxury that allowed clients to arrange visits discreetly. Neighbors called her the call girl, not out of scorn, but because of that ringing phone that set her apart. Lilly was known to be private, but not isolated. Her closest friend, Minnie Jensen, lived just downstairs. They would borrow from each other small things: sugar, oil, a kind word, simple gestures that stitched a fragile sense of community together. Some accounts suggest Lilly had moved to Stockholm from Malmö after a divorce, hoping for a fresh start. If that was true, the Atlas district, with its promises of a brighter future, might have seemed like a fitting place to begin again. By late April of 1932, as Walpurgis Night festivities stirred the city into celebration, Lilly was still taking calls, still seeing clients, still trying to carve out a place for herself in a world that rarely made room for women like her. That night, a strange phone call came in. An unknown man, described only as having a gentlemanly voice, arranged a meeting. And soon after, Lilly paid one last visit to Minnie, borrowing an item, then returning not long after, wearing only a coat over her naked body. It was around 9 o'clock, the last time anyone but her killer would see her alive. She had no way of knowing that the last knock at her door would come soon, and that behind it, something far worse than loneliness was waiting. On the evening of May 4th, 1932, the Stockholm police arrived at Sankt Eriksplan 11 after receiving a call from Minnie Jensen. She hadn't seen Lilly in days. No lights from her windows. No answers from her door. The officers forced entry, and what they found inside was more unsettling than anyone could have ever imagined. Lilly laid naked on her bed, face down, her body already beginning to stiffen with death. Blunt force trauma had ended her life, the evidence of a violent and sudden attack. But it was the other details that chilled the room. Her clothing, perfectly folded, sat undisturbed on a chair. The apartment was immaculate. No signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass. It was as if violence and order had collided. A brutal killing, carried out in a space of eerie, surgical neatness. And then there was the ladle. A simple kitchen gravy ladle, blood-stained, resting near the bed. Not heavy enough to have been the weapon, but heavy enough to carry meaning. Police noted other strange details. Sofa cushions, neatly stacked on top of Lilly's body. The bedspread smoothed out beneath her, as if death itself had been tucked in. They could not explain the scene, nor could they explain the near total absence of blood. Lilly's wounds were severe, yet the sheets, the mattress, even the floor showed minimal staining. It was as if her lifeblood had simply vanished. Further evidence added to the puzzle. Indications of recent sexual contact were found, further complicating the crime scene. Traces of saliva were detected on her neck, though investigators noted no visible wounds. There were no fingerprints matched to an unknown assailant, but latent prints from some of her old regular clients were collected. In another era, this might have been a breakthrough. In 1932, with only rudimentary fingerprint matching and no national database to search, it was another dead end. The investigators quickly concluded Lilly had likely known her killer. There were no signs of struggle at the door, no forced locks. She had let him in, perhaps expecting routine, not ruin. Police interviewed her known clients. They questioned friends, combed through visitor lists, traced phone calls made to her apartment. At least 9 individuals were brought in for questioning. Among them, a figure would later surface in rumors and forum whispers: the scientist, a client said to have peculiar habits and a quiet intensity. But in the end, no one was charged. All suspects were ruled out. Whether by weak alibis, social fear, or by the blunt limits of 1930s forensic science, the trail went cold. All that remained was the body, the ladle, the silent apartment, and questions heavier than the spring air, waiting for the silence to thicken. If you find yourself drawn into the shadows of stories like this, please consider subscribing. These forgotten voices, these unanswered questions, they deserve to be remembered. In the absence of answers, theories flourished, and as the decades passed, The mystery of Lilly Lindeström's death grew darker, stranger, and harder to hold. The most immediate and most rational theory focused on familiarity. Lilly knew her clients. She didn't let strangers into her home without reason. The lack of forced entry suggested she had trusted her killer enough to open the door for them. Maybe it was a regular. Maybe it was someone she'd known for months, or just a few minutes longer than she should have. Then there was the theory that emerged from the crime scene itself, a theory born not of logic, but of unease. The draining of blood, the ladle, blood-stained, left at the bedside, the missing fluid that never soaked the mattress, never pooled on the floor. Some believed Lilly had fallen prey to a modern vampire, not a creature of folklore, but a man consumed by ritualistic madness. The term clinical vampirism wouldn't enter psychological literature until decades later, but even in 1932, the horror was intuitive. Someone had ended her life, and then perhaps tempered with her blood afterwards. Yet not everyone accepted the myth at face value. Modern forensic reevaluations suggest a colder possibility. Despite the severe head trauma, there was no evidence Lilly's body had been positioned to encourage drainage. No siphoning equipment. No natural pooling around the head wounds. The missing blood may have been less total, more disturbing in its selective absence than in any complete draining. And the ladle, it could have been used not for drinking, but for cleaning. A compulsively neat killer, methodically scooping and disposing of blood to erase traces of violence, leaving behind a room so eerily tidy it almost felt sacred. There were other whispers too. Rumors that a member of law enforcement had been involved. A theory that painted the meticulous crime scene not as madness, but as insider knowledge. Someone who knew how to stage a scene. Someone who knew how to tidy death into silence. And then there were quieter, stranger possibilities. A medical professional, perhaps someone familiar with blood, life, and with how easily both could be drained away from a person. Each theory leaned heavily on what was missing: blood, evidence, witnesses. A ghost story stitched together not by what was found, but by what was not found. And in the void left behind, the Atlas vampire took shape. Not a man, not a monster, just a question with no mouth to answer it. Nearly a century has passed since Lilly Lindeström's life was taken. Stockholm has changed. The Atlas district grew denser, brighter, more modern, its clean facades hiding the memory sealed into its foundations. And yet, in the cracks between the cobblestones, in the quiet hum of passing trains at Sankt Eriksplan, her story still lingers. No killer was ever found. No confession ever surfaced. The blood-stained ladle sits not in evidence lockers, but in the imaginations of those still haunted by the case. Is it a ritual, an obsession, or simply brutality carried out with a strange, cold kind of ardor? The tools of justice in 1932 were blunt. Fingerprints were unreliable. Blood typing could exclude, but not identify. Saliva found on Lilly's body, biological traces inside the evidence, even potential stray hairs, All the invisible markers that today could build a perfect forensic map were in her time nothing more than overlooked ghosts. Science was ready to find her killer. The century she lived in was not. The frustration is almost palpable. The killer's traces were there, on her skin, in the folds of fabric, on the handle of a simple kitchen ladle, waiting for a future that would never come in time to save her name. So the questions remain. Who was the man that let Lilly into her apartment that night? Why was her life extinguished so violently, yet so clinically? And what became of the blood that should have stained everything it touched? The Atlas vampire, that chilling moniker, has survived longer than Lilly's own voice. It turned tragedy into legend. It made her a character in someone else's nightmare, rather than a woman with dreams of her own. But behind the myths, and behind the missing blood, there is a truth that endures. Lilly Lindeström lived. She loved. She hoped for a better future. And she deserved more than to be remembered only for how she died. Her story has been retold across books, podcasts, museum exhibitions. A schematic of her small apartment was once displayed at Stockholm's police museum, alongside remnants of evidence that time could not erase. Her name whispers through Swedish true crime history, not forgotten and not forgiven. In the end, it wasn't vampirism or ritual that robbed her of justice. It was time, silence, and a world just barely out of reach of the tools that could have saved her. But the Atlas vampire was never found, only replaced by darker questions. If Lilly's story stayed with you, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, because the stories that slip through the cracks of history are often the ones that matter the most. Next time, we head to Niterói, Brazil in 1966, where two men are found dead on a remote hillside, dressed in matching suits, waterproof raincoats, and bizarre lead masks covering their eyes. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle. Just a cryptic note tucked in one man's pocket. Instructions that hinted at a strange ritual, and a mystery that spiraled into legends of secret societies, experiments, and the unknown. Nearly 60 years later, the lead masks case remains one of the most unsettling puzzles, not only in South American history, but ever. Hope to see you there.